He had lived his entire life in a mansion, but it took only one sentence to make the walls collapse around him. There's no will. And with that, Charles Daniels and his two little sisters were pushed out into the winter cold like yesterday's garbage orphans, not just by fate, but by blood. Charles was 15, a quiet, well-mannered boy from Houston, Texas, white, handsome, tall for his age, and carrying a secret so heavy it made his shoulders curl inward. He was gay. But no one knew. How could he come out in a home where tradition was stitched tighter than the family's old quilts? His parents, Dr. Leonard Daniels and Dr. Amaka Daniels, were everything to him. Brilliant minds, tender hearts. His father, a pediatric cardiologist. His mother, a celebrated professor in medical ethics. Their home was filled with books, music, and a kind of warmth that only came from people who truly loved their children. Charles, Emma, and Grace, the three of them were wrapped in that warmth every day of their lives. Until the plane crash. It was a business trip. Routine. But routine didn't stop the flames from devouring everything that held their world together. There was no goodbye, no second chance, only silence, and the sound of two coffins being lowered into the ground. After the funeral, the adults gathered inside the mansion, not to grieve, but to divide. Edward, Samuel, Benjamin, and Cecilia, three uncles and one aunt who hadn't even shown up at Christmas last year, stood in the living room with their arms crossed and voices raised. Charles stood at the threshold with his sisters, still wearing the black suits from the burial, still clutching the memories of their parents like fragile glass. "Your father didn't leave a will," Edward declared, as if announcing the weather. "That means everything this house. The accounts, the land belongs to the family estate. The family, but not the children." "You're minors," Aunt Cecilia added, her voice like vinegar. "You'll be better off somewhere else. This place is for adults who understand the burden of legacy." The security gate clanged shut behind them minutes later. Just like that, with nothing but two worn backpacks and Emma's ragged stuffed animal, they were on the sidewalk, staring up at a house that had once been filled with laughter and bedtime stories. The front lights clicked off one by one, like a door closing on the last piece of their innocence. Charles wanted to scream, to beg, but there was no one left to listen. Beside him, Emma, 13, tried to act strong, but he saw her lip tremble. And Grace, barely 9, didn't ask questions. She only whispered, "Charles, where will we sleep?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know. He was the eldest now. That meant something, and it had to mean something, and in that moment the world became sharp, cold. He clutched his sisters close and started walking, away from the only home they had ever known, away from everything familiar. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a story no one would believe. Not just about betrayal, but about resilience, about the quiet power of love that survives even when the world turns its back, and about a boy who would rise from the frozen street not to seek revenge, but to build something stronger than any inheritance. Because what they didn't understand that day was that Charles Daniels would not disappear. He would return. If this story moved you, stay with us, because this is only the beginning. Subscribe to Heart Story, where true strength lives in the hearts we nearly forget. In the weeks that followed, the word home became a cruel echo. Charles Daniels led Emma and Grace through the underbelly of Houston bus stations, abandoned churches, damp alleyways, any place where no one would ask questions. Each night was colder than the last, and each day tested them in ways no child should ever endure. He had once woken up to fresh smoothies and his mother's soft humming in the kitchen. Now he crouched over a public water fountain, crushing expired fever tablets into the stream, praying it would be enough to bring Grace's temperature down. Her little body shivered against the concrete wall behind a pharmacy, wrapped in Charles's only sweater. Her cheeks, once round and rosy, were pale and hollowed. Emma, quieter than usual, chewed the edge of her sleeve, not from nerves, but from hunger. Charles hadn't eaten in 2 days. He gave them everything, his portion, his warmth, his hope. He tried shelters, but they were overcrowded or wouldn't admit unaccompanied minors. When he asked for medicine at a pharmacy, the woman behind the counter squinted at him with suspicion. "Where are your parents?" she asked. The word deceased felt dry in his throat. She waved him away, eyes narrowing as if homelessness were contagious. Sometimes adults avoided eye contact altogether. Other times they spat words like runaways or delinquents. One officer, spotting them sleeping outside a laundromat, threatened to take them to juvenile detention if they kept loitering like rats. That night, Charles held his sisters tighter, whispering stories from books he remembered to help them fall asleep. Then came the day Grace collapsed near a traffic light. Her fever had returned, worse this time, and Charles panicked. He lifted her in his arms and ran, weaving through honking cars and startled pedestrians, until a deep, familiar voice called out his name, Mr. James, their former family chef, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. He had cooked every Christmas roast Charles could remember. Now he stared at the boy skin stretched thin over bones, fingers trembling, and understood everything in an instant. He didn't ask why. He didn't pity. He simply opened his arms. Mr. James lived in a narrow two-room apartment above a corner store, cramped, hot, but filled with something Charles had almost forgotten: safety. He set up an old mattress for the children, used herbs and warm cloths to bring Grace's fever down, and made them soup that tasted, somehow, like home. "I can't keep you long," James admitted, voice heavy, "but I'll help you get on your feet." And so began the first steps toward survival. At sunrise, Charles walked to the local flea market and asked for work. No one hired a kid with no papers, but one vendor let him haul crates for small tips. The job paid nothing steady, so Charles found a new idea: frozen water packets. He bought a bag of ice and poured water into tiny sandwich bags, tying them shut and stacking them in a cooler with a handwritten sign, "Ice cold, 25 cents. He stood for hours under the blistering sun, offering them to anyone passing. Some ignored him, others laughed. Once, a man snatched the entire cooler and sprinted. Charles chased but fell hard, scraping his knees. He didn't cry, just went home with nothing that night. Emma, watching him, quietly asked to help. "I'm not a baby," she said. Together, they began again. She carried the sign while Charles sold. Their teamwork quiet but steady. Grace's energy slowly returned. She began coloring again with old crayons Mr. James found in a drawer. People often overlooked the boy on the street corner with tired eyes and sunburnt arms. But what they didn't see was the brother who chose to stay. The one who gave everything, including his pride, to make sure two little girls could dream again. At night, as the sisters slept curled together under a single blanket, Charles would stare out the window. He didn't pray for revenge. He didn't ask for miracles. He simply whispered one promise into the dark: "I won't let them break us." And in those whispers lay a lesson many forget: that dignity isn't measured by where you sleep, but by how fiercely you protect what matters when everything else has been stolen. Every morning began the same way: Charles Daniels rising before sunrise, slipping quietly through the narrow apartment to avoid waking Mr. James or the girls, and stepping into the aching stillness of the city. He carried with him a cooler made from a salvaged crate, cleaned plastic bags, and a bucket of ice he'd bartered from a fish vendor the night before. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Charles no longer asked for help. He built his own way, one frozen water packet at a time. The corner of the market had slowly become his territory, nestled between a fruit stall and an old woman selling used shoes. At first, vendors saw him as a nuisance, but over time, they began to respect the boy who showed up in heat waves, rainstorms, and cold fronts without fail. He started offering clean water to the other street sellers quietly, humbly earning loyalty with consistency. By the end of that year, Charles wasn't just selling water, he was distributing it to vendors, to delivery cyclists, to construction workers who couldn't afford store-bought drinks. His cooler grew into 2, then 3. He even designed a simple system for filtering and freezing, All operated from a shed behind the market that Mr. James helped him patch together. But none of it came easy. He still attended night classes at a church basement downtown, squeezing homework between boiling water and freezing batches. The other students were mostly adults, rough around the edges, but no one questioned him. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't mention who he used to be. He simply showed up, head down, and earned his credits one module at a time. At home, though, it hardly felt like a home. Emma had transformed too. She had enrolled in a free after-school coding program at the local community college center. Charles watched her some nights, hunched over the cracked screen of an old donated laptop, teaching herself how to build websites and debug code. Her eyes carried a determination that reminded him so much of their mother, and that alone made his exhaustion worth it. Grace had grown taller, stronger. She had a journal now worn and covered in crayon flowers where she scribbled drawings of stethoscopes and hospital beds. "When I become a doctor," she told Charles one night, "I'll make sure nobody ever sleeps outside sick." Eventually, they moved out of Mr. James's apartment, not far, just a shared studio in a rundown complex with peeling paint and a broken intercom. But it was theirs. Charles put their names on the lease. He paid every cent in cash. Proudly, they hung a family photo, faded but intact, on the wall above the mattress they all shared. Sometimes the girls asked why he never spoke about their uncles or the house on Oak Ridge Lane. He didn't avoid the question, but his answers were brief. "It's not where we're from that matters," he told them once. "It's what we choose to build when no one's looking." And he meant it, because every time Charles handed a bottle of clean water to a hungry vendor, or packed Grace's lunchbox with something fresh, or watched Emma present her first app to a nonprofit, he felt it, the quiet revenge of becoming more than what they expected him to be. But none of this erased the weight he carried. He still hadn't come out. Not to Emma, not to Miss James, not even in the mirror. His world was so fragile, so carefully stitched together, that the thought of unraveling any part of it felt dangerous. There were nights he dreamed of being honest, of finding a life where he didn't have to flinch at a slur on the street or pretend he didn't hear the taunts teenagers threw at guys like that. But then he'd wake, see his sisters still sleeping safely beside him, and the silence returned. Still, what Charles had built from scraps was beginning to hold. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with purpose. Because dignity, he had learned, isn't just surviving, it's creating something that lets others do more than just survive. And in giving others water, in helping Emma find her passion, in holding space for Grace's dreams, Charles was teaching the lesson no school ever did, that resilience isn't loud. It's quiet. It's choosing to stay kind in a world that tried to make you bitter. Charles Daniels never set out to destroy anyone. He didn't speak of revenge. He didn't track the people who discarded him and his sisters like trash after the funeral. But fate, it seemed, had its own way of settling accounts even when he kept his eyes forward and his hands busy building a life from ruin. The whispers came slowly, from vendors at the market, from old neighbors who recognized him, then looked away out of guilt. Word of a fire at the Daniels estate. They said Edward barely made it out. Some claimed he had locked himself inside for days, driven mad by fear of being poisoned. Before the kitchen exploded in flames, his body survived, but his skin burned and infected, never recovered. The house he'd stolen turned to ash. Samuel wasn't much better. A former investment broker turned recluse. He'd begun appearing in the streets barefoot, disoriented, muttering names no one else recognized. Emma, Grace, Charlie Boy. He wandered downtown in hospital gowns, shouting apologies to no one, chased by memories that refused to let him rest. Benjamin, the youngest uncle, once known for flaunting expensive watches and loud cars, lost everything in a lawsuit. His son had been arrested for fraud targeting elderly clients with fake investment schemes. Benjamin's accounts were frozen, properties seized. Rumors swirled that he was sleeping in his office, begging former colleagues for favors. And then there was Cecilia, the only sister of the Daniels brothers. The one who had looked Emma straight in the eye the night of the funeral and said, "Learn to suffer like the rest of us." She was now confined to a care home, her body decaying with a mysterious illness that no doctor could name, her skin blistered, her breath foul. Even the staff kept distance. People whispered about a curse. But Charles didn't believe in curses, only consequences. The final piece came in the form of a letter, handwritten and shaking, signed by someone Charles never expected to hear from again. Mr. Okoro, the family's former lawyer, a man who once stood in the grand foyer of the mansion and told Charles there was no will. He now lived alone, a ghost of the man he used to be. His son was lost to heroin. His wife had left, and now insomnia and regret kept him company. He had heard Emma's voice on the radio, giving a commencement speech about growing up homeless in Houston and never giving up on dignity. Something in her voice shattered him. When Charles opened the envelope, he saw only one thing: a photograph of the original will, handwritten, signed and sealed. His father's words clear as day, leaving the house, the investments, and the future to his children. Charles said nothing for days. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply walked to the window and watched the city, the same city that once spat on him, now drinking his water, using his vending stations, partnering with his small business and schools and shelters. He could have gone to the press. He could have dragged them all to court in public disgrace, but he didn't, because none of this changed who he had become. Instead, he gave the evidence to Emma. Let her read it first. She was the one who suggested the next steps, legal ones. Grace, now shadowing doctors in a mentorship program, sat beside them and listened quietly. "We don't need their shame," she said softly. "Just what's ours, so we can help others." And that became the purpose. Not to reclaim marble floors or dusty chandeliers, but to build something new from what was rightfully theirs. Justice, Charles realized, didn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it came dressed in silence, in collapsed empires, in guilt heavy enough to bend proud men to the ground, in a lawyer's shaking hand delivering the truth he once buried. And perhaps the deeper lesson was this: when you chase revenge, you risk becoming what you hate. But when you choose dignity, life finds a way to lift you higher than any courtroom ever could. He arrived unannounced, late on a Sunday afternoon. Mr. Okoro stood at the gate of a modest townhouse tucked into the south end of Houston, holding a worn folder pressed against his chest like a confession. His once impeccable suit hung loose on his frame, and his eyes carried the weight of 15 years. When Charles Daniels opened the door, he said nothing. Neither did Emma or Grace, who stood silently behind him, now taller, stronger, unrecognizable to the man who had once helped erase their names from everything they were meant to inherit. Okoro knelt. The concrete was still wet from morning rain, soaking through his trousers as he raised the folder with trembling fingers. "Your father's true will," he whispered. "I kept it buried. I thought it wouldn't matter, but it had mattered. Inside were the papers that should have protected them from everything: the house, the accounts, the investments, the land. Every asset had been left, without ambiguity, to Charles Daniels and his two sisters, all signed, all notarized. Okoro had hidden them under orders, under pressure. Now, with nothing left to lose, he had come to return what was never his. Charles didn't look at the documents. He looked at the man, the same man who had watched a teenager and two girls cry on a sidewalk, and said nothing. "You're too late," Charles said calmly. "We've known for years." The lawyer's lips parted, confusion flickering behind the shame. "Then why didn't you?" "Because we were too busy building something better." Charles stepped aside, not to invite him in, but to end the moment. He didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. That chapter had ended long ago. Within the year, the Daniels siblings filed and won a quiet legal case, regaining full rights to the estate, trust funds, and real estate portfolio once stolen from them. But they didn't keep it all. Together, they established the Daniels Foundation, a nonprofit providing emergency housing, education support, and medical care for unhoused youth and LGBTQ+ teens who had been thrown out of their homes, just as they once had. The house on Oak Ridge Lane was repurposed into a halfway shelter for teens. Its grand hall was cleared of old portraits, replaced with bookshelves, shared tables, and hand-painted art made by the very youth who now found sanctuary within its walls. In the foyer hung one frame alone, a family photo of Charles, Emma, and Grace, standing in the ruins of what was, smiling into the light of what could be. Charles, now a well-known entrepreneur in clean water infrastructure, never stopped working. His company served over a dozen neighborhoods, schools, and clinics. Emma built mobile platforms that connected homeless youth with food and shelter resources using just a phone number. Grace, now deep into her medical studies, volunteered every weekend at the very clinic that once turned them away. In a televised interview, Charles finally spoke the words he had once been too afraid to utter. "I'm a gay man," he said simply, "and when I was 15, my family threw me out into the cold. I thought it would end me, but it didn't. It became the fire that built everything we are now. We weren't saved by luck or miracles. We were saved by choosing each other every single day." He paused, looking into the camera. "So if someone ever told you that you weren't enough, that you didn't belong, or that your identity was a mistake, look at me. I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." That night, the three siblings sat down to dinner together. No chandeliers, no fine china, just boiled eggs, roasted potatoes, and a chipped wooden table. But the laughter was rich, and the room glowed with the kind of warmth money could never buy. Above them, on a small shelf, stood two framed photographs, one of their parents on their wedding day, and one of the three of them older now, but still together. Charles looked at his sisters, then at the simple meal before them, and smiled. It wasn't revenge, it was home. If your family ever made you feel like less just for being who you are, what would you say to them today? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there needs to read it. Subscribe to Heart Story for more stories of resilience, truth, and the power of chosen family.